Welcome back to HOA mess. I asked for records and they panicked. A certified envelope sat on my doormat and Karen yelled that my old file was reopened and the fees were due now. I will not be talked over. I bent down and picked up the envelope. The postmark said Redwood Landing Homeowners Association, Park City, Utah. My hands went cold. Brenda Anderson stood on my driveway with her handheld radio clipped to her pink cardigan, pointing at the envelope like it was a warrant. She said the compliance records show I never paid a landscaping violation from 3 years ago. I said I paid it in full. She said the portal shows no payment. I said I have the receipt. She said receipts do not count if the portal does not reflect them. Her voice went louder. She said if I make her repeat herself, it gets more expensive. I work as a gym manager with early morning open shifts. I need my house stable because my lease depends on HOA compliance. I cannot afford a lien or a hearing that drags into my work schedule. Brenda knows that. She smiled and tapped her radio. She said the tow vendor wants authorization now, and she can tow first and explain later. That is how enforcement works. I opened the envelope right there. Inside was a violation notice dated 3 years ago, with a compliance deadline I had already met. The notice said I owed $2,000 in fines, plus interest. I said, "This is insane." Brenda said the board reviewed the case and determined the original fine was never collected. I said I have proof I paid. She said bring it to the appeal hearing. I said when is the hearing? She said the portal will notify me. I said the portal has been down for 2 weeks. She smiled and said that sounds like a user error. I pulled out my phone and opened my email. I scrolled back 3 years. I found the payment confirmation from the management company. I held the screen toward her. She glanced at it and said email confirmations are not valid without a corresponding ledger entry. I said the ledger is your responsibility. She said exactly, and the ledger shows no payment. I said then your ledger is wrong. She said, or you never paid. Her radio crackled. She lifted it and said she was on scene and compliance was confirmed. A voice on the other end said copy. I asked who she was talking to. She said the tow dispatcher. I said you are not towing my car. She said non-compliance vehicles are subject to immediate removal per the bylaws. I said my car is compliant. She said your account is not. I said my account was closed 3 years ago. She said it was reopened yesterday. I asked who reopened it. She said the communications director. I said you are the communications director. She said exactly. I did not stop her because I wanted her on record. I let her keep talking. She said the HOA insists the only appeal method is the portal, and the portal conveniently breaks whenever someone tries to file a dispute. She said if I had a problem with that, I could take it up with the board. I asked when the next board meeting was. She said it was last night. I said I was not notified. She said all notifications go through the portal. The tow truck turned onto my street. I heard the diesel engine before I saw it. Brenda smiled and keyed her radio again. She said the vehicle is ready for pickup. I said you are not touching my car. She said watch me. The truck pulled up and the driver got out. He was a big guy in a stained shirt with a clipboard. He looked at Brenda and then at me. He said he needed authorization. Brenda handed him a printed form with no readable text. He glanced at it and said it looked good. I said it is not good. I said I paid this fine 3 years ago and she is lying. The driver looked uncomfortable. He said he just follows orders. I said, whose orders? He said the HOA. I pulled out my phone again. I opened my banking app and found the transaction from 3 years ago. $2,200 paid to Redwood Landing HOA. I showed it to the driver. He squinted at the screen. He said that is between me and the HOA. Brenda said the bank record does not prove the payment was applied to the correct account. I said my name is on the memo line. She said the memo line is not an official field. The driver shifted his weight. He said he did not want to get in the middle of this. Brenda said he was already in the middle. She said hook the car. He looked at me. I said if you hook my car, I am calling the police and filing a theft report. He hesitated. Brenda said it is not theft if it is authorized by the HOA. I said it is theft if the authorization is fraudulent. The driver stepped back. He said he needed to call his supervisor. Brenda said there was no time for that. He said he was calling anyway. He walked back to his truck and pulled out his phone. Brenda turned on me. She said I was making this harder than it needed to be. I said you are the one making it hard. She said if I cooperated, the fees could be reduced. I asked by how much. She said that depends on how fast I pay. I said I already paid. She said not according to the records. A dog walker passed on the sidewalk across the street. She had her phone out and she was filming. Brendan noticed and shouted at her. She said this is private property. The dog walker said the sidewalk is public. Brenda said she would report her for harassment. The dog walker kept filming. I made a mental note to find her later. The tow driver came back. He said his supervisor wanted to see proof of the violation before authorizing the hook. Brenda said the proof was already provided. He said his supervisor wanted to see it. She handed him the same printed form. He took a photo of it with his phone and sent it. We all stood there waiting. The air was calm and still, and every word felt louder than it should. Finally, his phone buzzed. He read the screen and said his supervisor wanted documentation that the payment was never received. Brenda said the ledger was documentation. He said he needed to see the ledger. She said the ledger was confidential. He said then he could not proceed. Brenda went red. She said we can tow first and explain later. That is how enforcement works. The driver said that is not how his company works. He got in his truck and left. Brenda turned on me. She said this was not over. I said it never started. She said the amenities lockout goes into effect immediately. I asked what amenities lockout. She said non-compliant homeowners lose pool, gym, and clubhouse access until their accounts are current. I said my account is current. She said the board disagrees. I said the board can disagree all they want. I have proof. She said proof is not the same as compliance. I asked what the difference was. She said compliance is what the board says it is. She walked to her car and drove off. I stood there holding the envelope. The whole thing felt wrong. I had paid that fine 3 years ago. I remembered it clearly because it was right after I moved in. The landscaping rule was absurd. They said my front yard bushes were 2 inches over the height limit. I trimmed them and paid the fine. The management company sent me a confirmation email. I printed it and filed it. I thought it was done. Now it was back. And it made no sense. Why reopen a case from 3 years ago? Why target me now? I was already in a dispute with the management company over a separate issue involving guest parking fees. They said I owed 6 months of back fees for having too many guests. I said the guest log was fabricated because I barely had any visitors. They said the log was accurate. I asked to see the log. They said it was being audited. The audit had been going on for 2 months. I went inside and pulled out my filing cabinet. I found the folder labeled HOA 2022. Inside was the original violation notice, the email confirmation, and a printed bank statement showing the payment. I also found a handwritten note from the management company acknowledging receipt. I scanned everything and saved it to my phone. Then I opened my laptop and logged into the HOA portal. It loaded for 30 seconds and then crashed. I tried again. Same result. I called the management company. The line rang 15 times and went to voicemail. I left a message asking for a callback and a copy of my payment history. If you are enjoying this, hit that like button and subscribe for more HOA drama and cold case investigations. I needed to understand what was happening. I started digging. I searched my email for every message from the HOA. I found dozens of notices, announcements, and policy updates. Most of them were signed by Brenda Anderson, Communications Director. I noticed something strange. Several of the emails had timestamps that did not match the dates in the subject lines. For example, an email dated March 15, 2022, had a timestamp showing it was sent on March 20, 2022. Another email dated June 3, 2022, was timestamped June 10, 2022. I opened my cloud storage and found the original violation notice from 3 years ago. I compared it to the one Brenda handed me today. They were almost identical, but the new one had a different case number. The old case number was VL2022047. The new one was VL2025047. Same number, different year. That was suspicious. I took screenshots of both notices side by side. I called my neighbor, Eric. He had lived in the neighborhood longer than I had. I asked if he remembered any old violations being reopened. He said no, but he said Brenda had been acting strange lately. He said she had been showing up at random times with her clipboard and radio, taking photos of houses and cars. He said she claimed she was conducting routine inspections, but the inspections felt targeted. He said 3 other homeowners had received notices in the past month for violations that were supposedly years old. I asked if any of them fought it. He said one guy tried. He filed an appeal and the portal deleted his submission. When he complained, Brenda said there was no record of his appeal. He ended up paying the fine just to make it go away. That was the pattern. Brenda was reopening old cases, demanding payment and using the broken portal to block appeals. It was a shakedown. I needed to prove it. I started building a case file. I printed every email, every notice, every bank statement, and every confirmation I had. I organized them chronologically in a binder. I labeled each section with sticky tabs. I also created a spreadsheet listing every discrepancy I found: backdated emails, mismatched case numbers, missing ledger entries, and deleted portal submissions. I called the management company again. This time someone picked up. It was a woman named Sandra. I explained the situation. She said she would look into it. I asked if she could pull my payment history. She said she could, but it would take a few days. I said I needed it sooner. She said the system was slow. I asked if there was any way to expedite it. She said not unless I filed a formal records request. I asked how to do that. She said I had to submit a written request to the board. I asked if I could email it. She said no, it had to be mailed or hand-delivered. I said that was ridiculous. She said those were the rules. I hung up and drafted a records request. I asked for my complete payment history, all correspondence related to case VL 2022-047, and any board minutes discussing the reopening of old violations. I printed 2 copies, signed and dated both, and drove to the HOA office. The office was in a small building near the clubhouse. I walked in and found Brenda sitting at the front desk. She looked up and frowned. She said the office was closed. I said the sign on the door said it was open until 5. She said the sign was wrong. I said I needed to submit a records request. She said records requests go through the portal. I said the portal is broken. She said that sounds like a user error. I walked up to the desk and placed the records request in front of her. I said, "This is my formal request." She did not touch it. She said I needed to use the proper form. I asked what form. She said the official records request form. I asked where to get it. She said the portal. I said the portal is broken. She said that sounds like a user error. I asked if she could print the form for me. She said the printer was out of paper. I looked at the printer. It had a full ream of paper in the tray. I pointed at it. She said the paper was reserved for official use. I said this is official use. She said it is not official unless it is on the proper form. I pulled out my phone and took a photo of the records request on her desk. I said I am documenting this. She said I could not take photos in the office. I said there is no rule against it. She said it is a privacy violation. I said I am taking a photo of my own document. She reached for the paper. I put my hand on it. She said if I did not leave, she would call security. I said there is no security. She lifted her radio and said she would call the police. I said, "Call them." She hesitated. I picked up the records request and walked out. I went to the post office and mailed a copy of the request via certified mail with return receipt. I also made an appointment with a notary to have my payment records sworn and certified. The notary was a retired paralegal named Diane. I explained the situation. She said she had seen cases like this before. She said HOAs sometimes reopen old violations to generate revenue, especially if they are struggling financially. She said the key was documentation. She said if I could prove I paid the original fine and the HOA never recorded it, I could force them to correct the ledger. She notarized my bank statements, email confirmations, and the handwritten note from the management company. She also gave me a signed affidavit stating that she reviewed the documents and found them credible. I added the notarized documents to my binder. I now had 3 sworn statements: the bank statement, the email confirmation, and the management company note. I also had screenshots showing the timestamp discrepancies and the mismatched case numbers. I felt ready. But I needed more. I needed to understand why Brenda was doing this. What was her motive? I started looking into the HOA finances. The association was required to publish an annual budget and a quarterly financial report. I found the reports on the HOA website. The most recent report was from 6 months ago. It showed a budget shortfall of $40,000. The report blamed rising insurance costs and deferred maintenance, but the numbers did not add up. The insurance line item was only $10,000 higher than the previous year. The maintenance line item was actually lower. Something else was draining the funds. I dug deeper. I found a line item labeled vendor services with no description. It was listed at $15,000 per quarter. That was $60,000 per year. I had never heard of vendor services. I searched the HOA bylaws and covenants. There was no mention of vendor services. I searched the board meeting minutes. I found one mention from 2 years ago. The board voted to approve a contract with a compliance consulting firm. The firm was called Summit Compliance Solutions. The vote was 3-2. The minutes did not include the names of the board members who voted. I searched for Summit Compliance Solutions online. The company had no website, no social media, no reviews. The only result was a business registration in Utah showing the company was formed 2 years ago. The registered agent was Brenda Anderson. That was it. Brenda had created a shell company and was funneling HOA money into it. The reopened violations were part of the scam. She was generating fake fines, pressuring homeowners to pay, and pocketing the money through her fake consulting firm. The broken portal was not a glitch. It was intentional. It prevented homeowners from filing appeals and kept the scheme running. I printed the business registration and added it to my binder. I also printed the financial reports and highlighted the vendor services line item. I had enough to go to the board. But I knew the board was compromised. 3 members had voted to approve the contract. They were either in on the scam or too intimidated to challenge Brenda. I needed leverage. I needed something that would force the board to act. I went back to the dog walker. I found her contact info through the neighborhood Facebook group. Her name was Lisa. I called her and asked if she still had the video from the tow truck incident. She said she did. I asked if she would send it to me. She said absolutely. She said she had been waiting for someone to do something about Brenda. She said Brenda had been harassing her for months over a fake noise complaint. She sent me the video. It showed Brenda threatening to tow my car, the driver asking for documentation, and Brenda admitting that the ledger was confidential. It also showed Brenda saying we can tow first and explain later. That is how enforcement works. I added the video to my evidence file. I now had proof of Brenda creating a fake consulting firm, proof of financial mismanagement, proof of selective enforcement, and proof of intimidation tactics. I needed one more thing. I needed a trump card. Something that would force the board to remove Brenda and reverse all the fraudulent fines. I filed a public records request with the city. Park City requires HOAs to file annual reports showing board membership, financial summaries, and any legal actions. I asked for the last 3 years of reports for Redwood Landing HOA. The city clerk said the reports were public and I could pick them up in 2 days. I also filed a police report. I told the officer that I believed the HOA was running a fraud scheme. I explained the fake consulting firm, the backdated violations, and the intimidation tactics. The officer took notes and gave me an incident number. He said he would forward the report to the fraud division. I asked how long that would take. He said it depends on their caseload. I asked if I could follow up. He said I could call the fraud division and reference the incident number. That incident number was my trump card. A police incident number from a prior HOA trespass attempt that shows a pattern. I did not tell anyone about it yet. I wanted to save it for the right moment. 2 days later, I picked up the city reports. I sat in my car and read through them. The reports confirmed that Brenda had been listed as the registered agent for Summit Compliance Solutions since its formation. They also showed that the HOA had paid Summit Compliance over $120,000 in the past 2 years. That was double the amount listed in the financial reports. The HOA was hiding money. I called Eric and asked if he knew any other homeowners who had been targeted. He gave me 4 names. I reached out to all of them. 3 responded. They all had similar stories. They had received notices for old violations. They had paid the original fines years ago. They had proof of payment. But the HOA claimed the payments were never recorded. 2 of them paid the fines again just to avoid the hassle. One of them was still fighting it. I asked if they would be willing to provide sworn statements. They all said yes. I met with each of them and collected their documentation. I had Diane notarize their statements. I now had comparison photo sets showing multiple homeowners treated differently, with 0 enforcement. Some homeowners had identical violations that were never enforced. Others had violations that were enforced twice. The pattern was clear. Brenda was targeting specific homeowners based on who was least likely to fight back. I compiled everything into a master binder. I organized it into sections: financial fraud, selective enforcement, procedural violations, intimidation tactics, and witness statements. I printed a table of contents and labeled each section with sticky tabs. I made 5 copies. 1 for me, 1 for the board, 1 for the management company, 1 for the police, and 1 for my attorney. I called an attorney. His name was Robert Chen. He specialized in HOA disputes. I explained the situation and sent him the evidence file. He reviewed it and called me back the same day. He said I had a strong case. He said the HOA had violated multiple state statutes, including fraud, selective enforcement, and failure to maintain accurate records. He said I could sue for damages, attorney fees, and injunctive relief. He also said I could file a complaint with the state HOA Oversight Board. I asked which option was faster. He said the complaint would get results in weeks. The lawsuit would take months. I said I wanted to file the complaint. He said he would prepare it. I scheduled a meeting with the board. I sent an email to all 5 board members requesting an emergency session to discuss financial irregularities and procedural violations. I copied the management company and my attorney. Brenda replied within an hour. She said emergency meetings required a 2/3 vote of the board, and she did not support the request. I replied that the bylaws allowed any homeowner to request a hearing on financial matters, and the board was required to respond within 10 days. I cited the specific bylaw section. She did not reply. 3 days later, the management company sent me a meeting notice. The board had scheduled a special session for the following week. The agenda listed one item: discussion of compliance account discrepancies. I knew that was code for shutting me down. But I was ready. I had the evidence. I had the witnesses. I had the trump card. The meeting was held at the clubhouse. I arrived early and set up my laptop and projector. I wanted to present the evidence visually. Brenda arrived 10 minutes before the meeting. She saw my setup and frowned. She said presentations required prior approval. I said this is not a presentation, this is evidence. She said evidence had to be submitted through the portal. I said the portal is broken. She said that sounds like a user error. The board members arrived. There were 5 of them: the president, the vice president, the treasurer, and 2 at-large members. Brenda was not on the board, but she sat at the head table as the communications director. The president called the meeting to order. He said the purpose of the meeting was to address my records request and my allegations of financial irregularities. He said I would have 10 minutes to present my case. I said I needed more time. He said 10 minutes was standard. I said, "This is not a standard case." He said, "10 minutes." I started. I projected the first slide showing the timeline of events. I explained the reopened violation, the missing ledger entries, and the broken portal. I showed the email timestamp discrepancies. I showed the mismatched case numbers. I showed the comparison photos of selective enforcement. I showed the financial reports with the vendor services line item. I showed the business registration for Summit Compliance Solutions with Brenda listed as the registered agent. The room went silent. Brenda stood up. She said the presentation was out of order. The president told her to sit down. She said I was slandering her. I said slander requires a false statement, and everything I said was documented. She said the documents were fabricated. I said they came from the city and the state. She said I had no right to access those records. I said public records are public. She sat down. I continued. I showed the witness statements. I showed the notarized payment confirmations. I showed the video from the tow truck incident. I played the audio of Brenda saying we can tow first and explain later. That is how enforcement works. The board members looked at each other. The treasurer asked if Brenda had any response. Brenda said the consulting contract was approved by the board. The treasurer said he did not remember approving it. Brenda pulled out a printed document and said the vote was recorded in the minutes from 2 years ago. The treasurer asked to see the minutes. Brenda handed him the document. He read it and said this is not the version he signed. He said the version he signed did not mention Summit Compliance. Brenda said he must be misremembering. I projected the next slide. It showed the city reports listing the total payments to Summit Compliance. I said the HOA paid over $120,000 in 2 years. I said the financial reports only showed $60,000. I asked where the other $60,000 went. Brenda said the discrepancy was a clerical error. I said a $60,000 clerical error. She said accounting mistakes happen. I said not when the registered agent of the vendor company is also the communications director of the HOA. The president asked Brenda if she owned Summit Compliance. She hesitated. She said she was listed as the registered agent for administrative purposes. The president asked if she received any payments from Summit Compliance. She said she received a consulting fee. The president asked how much. She said that was confidential. The president said it was not confidential if it involved HOA funds. She said she would need to consult her attorney. The president said the meeting was adjourned pending a financial audit. Brenda exploded. She said the board had no authority to order an audit without a vote. The president said he was calling an emergency vote right now. He asked for a motion. The vice president moved to authorize an independent audit of all HOA financial records for the past 3 years. The treasurer seconded. The president called for a vote. 3 board members voted yes. 1 voted no. 1 abstained. The motion passed. Brenda said the vote was invalid because it was not on the agenda. The president said financial oversight is always within the board's authority. Brenda said she would challenge the vote. The president said she could do that, but the audit was moving forward. Brenda grabbed her radio and her bag and stormed out. After the meeting, the treasurer pulled me aside. He said he had been suspicious of Brenda for months, but did not have proof. He said she controlled all the communication channels and made it impossible to question her. He said I did the neighborhood a favor by bringing this forward. He asked if I would be willing to serve on a temporary oversight committee to monitor the audit. I said yes. The audit took 3 weeks. The auditor was a forensic accountant named Karen Patel. She reviewed every transaction, every invoice, and every contract for the past 3 years. She found that Summit Compliance had billed the HOA for services that were never performed. The invoices listed vague descriptions, like compliance consulting and communication support. There were no timesheets, no deliverables, and no performance metrics. The payments were approved by Brenda using a signature stamp that was supposed to be reserved for the president. The president confirmed he never authorized the payments. Karen also found that Brenda had reopened over 30 old violation cases in the past 2 years. Of those 30 cases, 23 had already been paid and closed. Brenda had changed the ledger entries to make it look like the payments were never received. She then sent new notices demanding payment. 12 homeowners paid again. The duplicate payments went into a separate account that was not included in the financial reports. The account was controlled by Summit Compliance. The total fraud was over $150,000. Karen recommended that the HOA file a criminal complaint and pursue civil recovery. The board voted unanimously to do both. They also voted to terminate Brenda's position as communications director and to revoke her access to all HOA systems. Brenda did not show up to that meeting. I used the audit report to trigger an internal investigation, and the board panics in real time. I also used my police incident number from the fraud report to show a pattern of misconduct. The police opened a formal investigation. They interviewed Brenda, but she refused to answer questions without an attorney. They also interviewed the management company. Sandra, the woman I spoke to earlier, confirmed that Brenda had pressured her to alter ledger entries and delete portal records. Sandra provided emails and call logs showing Brenda's instructions. The district attorney filed charges 3 months later. Brenda was charged with theft by deception, fraud, and falsifying business records. She pleaded not guilty. The case went to trial. I testified along with Sandra, the treasurer, and 4 other homeowners. The jury convicted her on all counts. She was sentenced to 3 years in prison and ordered to pay full restitution. The HOA recovered most of the stolen funds through a civil settlement with Summit Compliance. The settlement also required the company to dissolve. The board implemented new financial controls, including mandatory dual signatures on all payments over $500 and quarterly audits by an independent accountant. They also replaced the broken portal with a new system that included full audit logging and automatic backups. My violation was officially closed with a full refund of the duplicate payment. The board also refunded the 12 other homeowners who had paid twice. They sent apology letters to all 30 homeowners whose cases had been reopened. The letters included a neutral hearing officer assigned so Brenda could not control appeals, and a promise to review all enforcement procedures to prevent future abuse. The final board meeting was packed. Over 50 homeowners showed up. The president read a statement acknowledging the fraud and apologizing for the board's failure to catch it sooner. He said the board had learned valuable lessons about oversight and accountability. He also announced that a new compliance director had been hired. The new director was a licensed property manager with no ties to any board member. During the public comment period, Eric stood up and thanked me for pushing the investigation. He said if I had not fought back, the fraud would still be happening. Several other homeowners clapped. One woman said Brenda had intimidated her for years, and she was glad someone finally stood up to her. Another man said he had paid duplicate fines and never thought he would get his money back. He thanked me for proving the payments were fraudulent. Brenda's boomerang line came back in the most satisfying way. At the trial, the prosecutor played the video of her saying we can tow first and explain later. That is how enforcement works. The prosecutor asked her if that was her philosophy of enforcement. She said it was taken out of context. The prosecutor asked what context made that statement acceptable. She did not have an answer. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. The funny karma moment happened during the audit. Karen found a stack of complaints Brenda had filed against other board members for minor rule violations. The complaints were printed and ready to be delivered. But Brenda never sent them because the violations were fabricated. Karen compared the complaint forms to the violation notices Brenda had sent to homeowners. They used the same template, the same formatting, and the same printer. Karen said it was clear Brenda had been planning to use the fake complaints to intimidate board members who questioned her. The board president read the complaints out loud during the meeting. The room reacted with shock and laughter. One board member said Brenda had accused him of parking his trash cans too close to the street, even though he lived in a cul-de-sac with no street access. Brenda says nobody complains and a stack of complaints appears, all fake, all in her handwriting. Brenda's bluff gets read out loud, and the room reacts. The exposure was total. She had claimed the vendor services were legitimate. She had claimed the ledger was accurate. She had claimed the portal crashes were user errors. Every claim was proven false. The board members who had been intimidated into silence finally spoke up. They said Brenda had threatened to report them for covenant violations if they questioned her. They said she had used her control of the email system to block communications and manipulate votes. They said they were afraid of her. The HOA drops the case to avoid a public records mess. Actually, that is wrong. The HOA did not drop anything. The HOA pursued every legal remedy. But the phrase fits how Brenda tried to play it. She tried to get the board to drop the audit by threatening to release embarrassing emails. She said the emails would show board members making inappropriate jokes and discussing confidential matters. The board called her bluff. They asked her to produce the emails. She could not. The emails did not exist. It was another lie. The payback vector was a neutral hearing officer, assigned, so Karen cannot control appeals. That became the new standard. The board amended the bylaws to require that all appeals be heard by an independent third party with no ties to the HOA or the management company. The hearing officer is selected from a pre-approved list of mediators and arbitrators. The homeowner and the HOA each have the right to challenge the selection. The hearing officer's decision is final unless overturned by a court. The whole process took a year. From the certified envelope on my doormat to Brenda's sentencing, it was 12 months of digging, documenting, and fighting. I spent hundreds of hours on the case. I spent thousands of dollars on legal fees, even though the HOA eventually reimbursed me. I lost sleep. I lost patience. I almost gave up a dozen times. But I did not. I kept going because I knew I was right. I knew I had paid that fine. I knew Brenda was lying, and I knew if I did not stop her, she would keep doing it to other people. The notary, Diane, told me something that stuck with me. She said most people give up when they hit the first roadblock. They pay the fine, accept the loss, and move on. She said that is what scammers count on. They count on people being too tired, too busy, or too intimidated to fight back. She said the only way to stop a scammer is to out-stubborn them. You have to be willing to dig deeper, push harder, and stay in the fight longer than they expect. That is what I did. I out-stubborned Brenda. The neighborhood is different now. People are more engaged. Attendance at board meetings has tripled. Homeowners ask questions. They request documents. They hold the board accountable. The new compliance director publishes a monthly report showing all violations, all fines, and all payments. The report includes photos and descriptions. Everything is transparent. The portal works. Appeals are processed within 10 days. The financial reports are audited quarterly and posted online. I still live in the neighborhood. I still manage the gym. I still get up early for my shifts. But I am not looking over my shoulder anymore. I am not waiting for the next fake violation. I am not wondering if my car will be towed. I am free. And so is everyone else. Brenda is in prison. She will be there for at least 2 more years. After that, she will be on probation and banned from serving in any HOA leadership role. She will also be paying restitution for the rest of her life. The court ordered her to pay $1,500 per month until the full amount is recovered. At that rate, it will take over 8 years. She is 53 years old. She will be in her 60s before she is done paying. I do not feel bad for her. She made her choices. She chose to lie. She chose to steal. She chose to intimidate and harass people who were just trying to live their lives. She chose to reopen old cases and double-charge homeowners who had already paid. She chose to create a fake company and funnel HOA money into her own pocket. She chose to break the portal and delete records. She chose to threaten people with towing and liens and lockouts. She chose all of it. And now she is paying the price. The cold case is closed. The mystery is solved. The culprit is caught. The neighborhood is safe. And I can finally relax. I still keep the binder, though. It is on a shelf in my office. I look at it sometimes and remember the fight. I remember the long nights, the frustrating phone calls, the tense meetings, and the final victory. I remember how close I came to giving up. And I remember why I did not. Because someone had to. Someone had to stand up and say no. Someone had to fight back. And that someone was me. If you ever find yourself in a situation like this, do not give up. Gather your evidence. Document everything. Get witnesses. Get notarized statements. Get an attorney if you need one. File the complaints. Show up to the meetings. Stay calm. Stay focused. And do not let them intimidate you. You are right. They are wrong. And if you keep fighting, you will win. I will see you in the next story.